It looks very professional. It looks very professional.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Evan Weir. My background is radio and TV, and we're going to talk about television censorship in the United States. Going back to the early days, back to when TV started commercially in 1946. Federal law prohibits obscene, indecent, and profane content from being broadcast. That may seem to be clear enough, but determining what obscene and indecent and profane actually means might be very difficult. 1964, the Supreme Court landmark case on obscenity and pornography. The Justice Potter Stewart famously wrote, "I know it when I see it." That case still influences FCC rules today, and complaints from the public about broadcasting objectionable content drive the enforcement of those rules. In other words, if you know it when you see it and find it objectionable, just contact the Federal Communications Commission. File a complaint. It's that simple. That's all you have to do. Factors in determining how FCC rules apply include the specific nature of content, the time of day it was broadcast, and the context in which the broadcast took place. Broadcasting obscenity content is prohibited by law at all times of the day. Indecent and profane content are prohibited on broadcast TV and radio between 6 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night, because they feel, unlike kids like me, who used to watch TV all hours of the night until the test pattern came on, children are probably not in the audience. And you know what? You can trust them. You can trust the TV networks. National Association of Broadcasters, sealed good practice, television code. Trust us. We know what we're doing. To preempt government censorship, the National Association of Broadcasters adopted the Code of Practices for Television Broadcasters, or the Television Code of 1952, which basically followed pretty closely the Hays Code or the Green Code for movies, where they had a whole bunch of do's and be carefuls in the movies, so the TV people just took that over. Moral guidelines. The code outlined ethical standards for programming, forbidding profanity, negative portrayals of family life or religious faith, illicit sex, substance abuse, excessive violence, and disrespect toward law enforcement. Remember, what was one of the big shows in the 1950s? Boom, 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 boom. Story about the sea is true. The names have changed to protect the innocent. Dragnet.
But I have something to say.
Yeah.
They don't show all the episodes on TV.
Well, now
the color episodes they
Yeah.
show with the Harry
Yeah.
from
from 68 to 70. 68 to 1970. Including
Nash.
football. Yep.
What is it called? The other program.
Henry Morgan. Performers' attire and movements also regulated to ensure decency, and that included women's pants. The code regulated how performers should dress and move within the boundaries of decency. Further, news reporting was to be factual, fair, and without bias, and commentary and analysis should be clearly defined as such, something which does not happen today. American TV networks and stations have standards and practices departments. The apt job title for what they are is censors. These departments are responsible for ensuring that all programming, excluding news broadcasts, adheres to legal requirements, policy guidelines, factual accuracy, and community standards. Their role encompasses everything, reviewing scripts and photographs, advertising, promotions, and the final broadcast product. Nobody here remembers this show. I guarantee you nobody remembers this show. It was on the Dumont Network. You remember the Dumont Network? Lasted only about 9 years, 1946 to 1955. One of the first shows, comedy shows on the Dumont Network was this, The Mary Kay and Johnny Show, which started in 1947 and would be seen in New York on Channel 5. Dumont's problem, they couldn't get clearance, and a lot of the shows that they did air never really got to big audiences because a lot of stations did not take Dumont programming. But anyway, this is Christopher Stearns, this is Mary Kay Stearns, and that is Johnny Stearns. It is the Mary Kay and Johnny Show. It probably was the first sitcom, and it was before the TV code, 1947, 1948. And it depicted a married couple sharing a bed. The first time you ever saw on TV a real-life married couple playing a couple on TV sharing a bed. Mary Kay and Johnny Stearns ran from 1947 to 1950 and somehow managed to break this ground, which was immediately taken back. It would take until 1959 on the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, and we all know Ozzie and Harriet Nelson were a married couple. Anyway,
Ricky Nelson's parents.
Yeah, right. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, a real-life couple. Ozzie and Harriet Nelson slept in the same bed. In addition to portraying its stars who were married in real life in the same bed, the series was also the first to feature a pregnant woman. Mary Kay Stearns became pregnant in real life, and that forced the team to write her condition into the show. Christopher Stearns the next year was part of the show as a baby. McCarthy's red baiting. Joe McCarthy's red baiting. It's all part and parcel to the early days of TV. He made lots of empty accusations about all these communists in the State Department and could never produce one. Except TV, radio, newspapers loved him because he was good copy. May not have been truthful, but he was good copy, and he was never truthful. Anyway, during the McCarthy era, when the Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy was without evidence accusing people of being a communist, CBS had employees taking loyalty oaths to the U.S. in 1950. In 1951, CBS hired ex-FBI agents to tail the talent. They were looking for communists over at Bill Paley's place back in the early 50s. Dumont dumped the Hazel Scott Show in 1950. Anybody hear of Hazel Scott? Piano.
Vaguely.
Her husband was a congressman.
Vaguely.
Yeah, she basically
Who
played.
was her husband? He was a congressman.
He was the Reverend Congressman, the Reverend Adam Clayton Powell II.
Right.
So he was not a communist. He was in the Congress. Anyway, they dumped the show in 1950, and she decided to try and clear her name before the House, United States House Un-American Activities Committee hearing. Her husband, Adam Clayton Powell II, said, "Don't do it. You're going to ruin your career." She said, "No, I haven't done anything wrong. I've done nothing wrong." She was accused of being a communist because she played piano at the Cafe Society in Greenwich Village, which allegedly was a communist hangout. She was the first African American to host a network TV show. The show started on July 3rd, 1950, and ended on September 29th that year. She was not a communist, but she did play the piano at what was called an alleged communist hangout in the 1930s, and that was her crime. TV code. Pregnancy was a TV problem. Was anybody here have kids, married and have kids, and was that a problem? It was for TV in 1952. It was for American TV in 1952. Lucy and Desi almost ended I Love Lucy after they found out she was going to have a second baby. 1952 America was considered racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV. Television had censorship. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant. But if you knew Spanish and you listened to Desi rather closely, because the censors weren't Spanish, he kept yelling pregnant, pregnant, pregnant in Spanish. And you can see it still today on the 180 episodes that are on Pluto TV. So one after another, you could see him yell pregnant. Jess Oppenheimer was the guy who ran the I Love Lucy show. This guy right there, looking adoringly at Lucy, and there is Desi. He has a solution. He's the showrunner. He's the producer and the head writer, and he says, why don't we basically say Lucy's pregnant? But there was a problem. Pregnant woman had never appeared on stage or television before, at least one who is not showing. So this was a big risk for all concerned. Lucy, Desi, Oppenheimer from the creative end. CBS and the show's sponsor, Philip Morris. But there was a show which did feature a pregnant woman on Dumont, Mary Kay Stearns, 4 years earlier. They either forgot about it or weren't aware of it. Again, Dumont programs, most people weren't very well aware of what they were showing. And the storyline worked. CBS allowed Lucy to appear on screen during the pregnancy, and some of the scripts did address the topic. However, the executives at CBS said, keep it, don't overplay it. Don't overplay it. Make sure it's there, but let's only shoot her from the neck up so nobody will get offended. A married pregnant woman, don't offend anybody. Don't offend anybody. So the show goes on. Lucy and Desi there. This is according to Lucy. In the early fall, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did 7 shows concerning my pregnancy. These films were screened by a priest, minister, and a rabbi. For any possible violation of good taste, it was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. So a priest, the minister, and the rabbi, they walk into a room to watch a TV show. The 3-man religious committee had doth protested. What's wrong with pregnant? They were hardly in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. Oh, by the way, what's wrong with this picture? Besides being in color, you saw it all in black and white. What's wrong with this picture? She's wearing pants. She's wearing pants.
Oh.
And in the 1950s, women did not wear pants in the 1950s, did they? No.
Maybe a few.
During I Love Lucy's second season, 52-53, Lucy was pregnant. She couldn't do an entire 39-episode production, so she would miss a bunch of programs. At that point in TV, you just show the program once, and that created a problem because nobody believed that anybody would watch the film or a TV show for a second time if they saw it once. Desi and the producer, Jess Oppenheimer, came up with an unusual idea. Rebroadcast some episodes from the first season. They were rating winners and created a new area for TV syndicated revenue. Now, why were they big winners? Because the Federal Communications Commission in 1952 basically started handing out licenses again. So a lot of people didn't see the show in 1951-52. They all of a sudden got to see not only the 1952-53 shows, but also the ones from 1951-52. So it worked out well. Desilu Studios went on to invent the concept of the rerun and used the profits of the I Love Lucy show syndication to fund the growth of the studio. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were the television industry's first millionaires. Liberace was the third TV industry millionaire from that old show that he did, the Liberace show. I wish my brother George was here. And he was number 3. Anything wrong with Mary Tyler Moore in that picture?
They're all wearing pants.
Yeah, they are. They are, aren't they? They're wearing pants. Yeah, showing the rear end. It's 1961. During the early days of American television, it was not uncommon for women to wear pants, or it was uncommon for women to wear pants, especially in prime time, because it was largely considered unacceptable for women to wear pants in public during that era. Society norms valued modesty and femininity, and pants were viewed as masculine and rebellious for women. She's wearing pants there. Stay away. Go on that other sidewalk. You don't want to be around that type of woman. Lucille Ball occasionally wore pants in I Love Lucy in the early 1950s, as did Vivian Vance as Ethel. But Mary Tyler Moore on the Dick Van Dyke Show was the first woman to wear pants consistently, and that caused problems at CBS. The sitcom Housewife of 1961 really had its classical parameters and dimensions. Mary Tyler Moore told NPR's Terry Ross in 1995. They were established and they hardly ever varied. All of these wives were kind of obedient, and a representative of the vows to love, honor and obey. There she is wearing pants. It's Bob Crane, who ended up being the star of Hogan's Heroes on the bongos. Quick side there, Bob Crane was a disc jockey in Bridgeport, Connecticut in the 1950s in WICC radio. And WICC radio also had a television station, a UHF station, probably something like Channel 58 or something like that. And TVs weren't equipped to, basically, they weren't equipped to show UHF. They didn't have UHF dials for the most part. Anyway, Bob Crane said on the radio, anybody on TV, come down to our studio. And the first one coming down, get $100. Nobody came. Nobody was watching Bob Crane on TV. Nobody came. Anyway, there's Mary Tyler Moore. The resistance to Laura Petrie and Pants didn't come from the show's creator, Carl Reiner. CBS objected because she, or maybe her butt, looked too good. Mary was a woman of the day, said Reiner. I remember I said, that's what modern women are doing today. What was the big deal? Apparently there was concern about something called cupping. C-U-P-P-I-N-G. You never heard of cupping? Well, maybe it was a TV term or a movie term. That is how defined Moore's pants were in her rear. You could see her, that she had a very well-defined rear, and CBS thought women wouldn't want to watch the show because she had a good butt. Belly button. Too much belly button. Gilligan's Island. Gilligan's Island. Don and Ginger, actually Marianne, Dawn Wells and Ginger, Tina Louise.
What year was that?
64 to 67. 64 to 67. Skipper and Mrs. Howe and Jim Backus as Thurston Howe, Gilligan, and the professor, Russell Johnson. Too much belly button. Belly buttons were forbidden on American television, so much so that Dawn Wells and Tina Louise on Gilligan's Island and Barbara Eden on I Dream of Jeannie would have to keep their belly buttons concealed. CBS censors would come to Gilligan's Island, and they were there in the name of enforcing broadcasting standards. Sherwood Schwartz was the executive producer and writer of Gilligan's Island, and I was reading that one day he's complaining to his wife because Tina Louise was wearing more and more push-up bra and the belly buttons, and he said between Tina's breasts and Dawn's belly button, I get no rest. I get no rest at all. Maybe these censors were basically looking for some jollies. Barbara Eden, who just recently celebrated her 94th birthday.
How old?
94. Belly buttons were forbidden on American television, so much so that Dawn Wells and Tina Louise of Gilligan's Island and Barbara Eden would have to keep their belly buttons concealed. She wore a costume with a high waist, pants to hide her navel. But in the early episodes, noted Eden years later, the pants would ride down from time to time, reveal her belly button for the camera. Nobody noticed. Nobody noticed except the guy from the Hollywood Reporter. And this writer published a piece about her unseen navel. Other outlets picked up the story and it became a whole different thing. NBC's own comedy show, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, planned to do a sketch where they would dramatically unveil her belly button to the world. The network finally decided to make a rule about it. No belly buttons on network shows. No toilets either. Couldn't show a toilet. First toilet on TV, the tank, was shown in the 1957 episode of Leave It to Beaver to hide an alligator. In 1971, on All in the Family, there was a toilet bowl being flushed sound. The first time ever on TV, the toilet bowl flush. News in the Code, that's Martha Roundtree. And she's the inventor of Meet the Press. And Martha Roundtree and I have something in common. She was at Mutual Radio when she invented that show in 1945, and I was at Mutual Radio when we closed down, shut all the lights and closed down the doors in the late 1980s, yes.
I think the current host of the show.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into it, okay? Starting in 1952, news reporting was to be factual, fair, and without bias. and commentary and analysis should be clearly defined as such. There were news reports on network TV starting in 1946. The Dumont Network, Meet the Press, moved to TV on November 6, 1947. After 2 years of being on Mutual Radio, Mutual Broadcasting Network, CBS had been doing TV news since July 1st, 1941. Remember John Cameron Swayze and the Camel News Caravan? John Cameron Swayze probably became more famous with his Timex ads. He took a licking, but kept on ticking. Yeah.
Was he an anchorman on?
He was on TV doing news.
What was he, an anchorman?
Yes. Pre-code, Camel News Caravan. The makers of Camel cigarettes bring you the world's latest events right into your living room. Sit back, light up a Camel, and be an eyewitness to the happenings that made history in the last 24 hours. R.J. Reynolds handed its own news production to NBC, with the company choosing both the face and name of its new nightly news show, John Cameron Swayze. It began on February 16, 1949. It ran 15 minutes every night, 7:45 Eastern Time. Swayze and the Camel News Caravan pioneered the news format that is still used. And there was censorship on that show. The first censorship, yes?
I had dinner with a lady whose father did the news. Her name escapes me at the moment.
She was here.
Oh, yes, she passed away.
Yeah.
Did you know
Yeah,
that?
I know her. Yeah, we spoke.
I can't think of
she
his
was,
name, but he did the news every night.
Yeah, he was one of the commentators during,
She's
or
no
one
longer
of the,
with
yeah,
us,
she was one of the,
Yes.
he was one of the moderators
She was a lovely lady.
on the Kennedy-Nixon debate, 1960.
Yes.
Anyway, NBC News reports were not allowed to show no smoking signs. That makes sense. It's a cigarette company. And the only figure permitted to be smoking a cigar was Winston Churchill. NBC asked R.J. Reynolds if it could broadcast special news reports when the Korean War started in 1950, and they said no, can't do it. Why? Just, we don't want you to. But Camel had, or at least R.J. Reynolds, had a history of censorship. 1939, New York World's Fair. Eddie Cantor publicly denounced anti-Semitic radio personality Father Charles Coughlin, and then was dropped by his radio sponsor, Camel Cigarettes, and lost his radio show. Camel would rather see Father Coughlin on, not being criticized, and they decided to get rid of Eddie Cantor because of his criticism. Well, he comes back in 1940, and Jack Benny had to vouch for him. Jack Benny had to say, if he does anything wrong, blame it on me. And he gets his radio show back in 1940. Bill Paley, CBS. Bill Paley, he was a censor, a chief censor of TV. Bill Paley erected 2 towers of power, one for entertainment, the other for news. The 60-Minute creator Don Hewitt, his real name was Don Horowitz, said in his autobiography, Tell Me a Story, and he decreed that there would be no bridge between them. In short, Paley was the guy who put Frank Sinatra and Edward R. Murrow on radio and 60 Minutes on TV. Edward R. Murrow was not a journalist, but not a trained journalist. He learned on the job, starting in 1939 during the bombing of London on every night, the London Blitzkrieg. So he learned his job. And because he wasn't a journalist, he was probably more hard-hitting because he didn't care. Morrow was approached to host a TV weekly program with his associate, Fred Friendly, whose wife, Ruth, lives around here. She's about 95 years old. Ruth Friendly. She was teaching at Columbia University up until the start of COVID back in 2020. Anyway, the television show was to be called See It Now. Television was in its infancy, and Morrow and Friendly had to learn the process of filmmaking and the primitive television equipment on the job. See It Now. He brings down Joe McCarthy. Well, he doesn't bring down Joe McCarthy. He starts the process to bring down Joe McCarthy, and Joe McCarthy was brought down by his own pride.
There's also the McCarthy Army hearings.
Yeah, that comes after, though.
Oh.
That comes after. Edward R. Murrow, a report on Senator Joseph McCarthy. See It Now, March 9th, 1954. Morrow was not allowed to use the CBS money or logo to promote the show. William Paley was afraid of the show. The show used McCarthy's own words against him. McCarthy demanded equal time, and Morrow gave him equal time. And it was probably the worst decision that Joe McCarthy ever made in his life. McCarthy faced off against Morrow. It's April 6, 1954, and it is the start of the end of McCarthyism. The hearings would come after this, where Welsh would ask, "At long last, have you no decency?" Right? Morrow, he's asking. McCarthy, probably drunk, because he was an alcoholic, smirking on the show. And William Paley, after the show, says, "Oh my God, our shows are that powerful? We can't have that. We could be in trouble for that." Morrow had complained to Paley he could not continue to do the show if the network repeatedly provided equal time to subjects felt wronged by the program. Back in those days, there was the fairness doctrine, which was known as the Mayflower Doctrine in 1938, which basically said if somebody felt wronged by somebody on the show, that person could get equal time to defend themselves. By 1960, Morrow had had enough of Bill Paley and left. His last show was Harvest of Shame, which you can see up on YouTube now. 1960, black and white, Edward R. Morrow. Only difference between now and then is that today it would be in color and there would be a different announcer, but the same show. Yes?
Bro worked for Kennedy.
Worked for Kennedy. Yes, he did.
Well, head of something.
Yeah, he went to the Kennedy administration. So this is his last show. Howard K. Smith is at CBS, and Ruth Friendly said to me one day, "Did you ever hear the story about Howard K. Smith?" I said, "Vaguely. You were there, so you tell me the story." And this is the story she told me. Smith, a CBS News correspondent, was covering the riots in Birmingham, Alabama during the Civil Rights Revolution in the early 1960s. The show was called Who Speaks for Birmingham? That was started by Morrow, who left to work for the Kennedy administration. And Smith said to Morrow, "Should I continue with the show?" And Morrow said, "I don't see any reason why you shouldn't. Keep going on." And they do the documentary. After giving an account of blood flowing in the streets, Smith ended his planned documentary with a quotation from Edmund Burke. "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing about it." That was his downfall. They didn't like the fact that he quoted Burke. The network power summoned Smith to New York. He was told his commentary violated standards of objectivity. It's his opinion. You're supposed to have an opinion, or allowed to have an opinion, within the show, as long as it is marked commentary. It's all the time. CBS Chairman William Paley said, "I've heard all this junk before. If that's what you believe, you'd better go somewhere else." Am I fired? Yes, you are. Show was heavily edited. CBS lost its Birmingham, Alabama affiliate over the production. They wanted nothing to do with CBS, even though in those days, CBS was the network that had all of the top-rated shows. They were offended by the fact somebody wanted to look at the civil rights movement in Birmingham, Alabama. Smith was eventually hired by ABC. Ain't nothing but a hound dog. Any Elvis fans here? Nobody liked Elvis?
I love Elvis.
You
Who doesn't?
Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So let's take care of some business here. Ed Sullivan Show. Before I go on, Jerry Stiller, Stiller and Mirror, remember them? Jerry's my cousin.
Oh, really?
And we were talking one day about Ed, all this other stuff, and Ed actually edited Jerry and Ann's stuff. Jerry being Jewish, Ann being Irish, and Ed being Irish and his wife was Jewish. So he had a little vested interest in all of this because Sylvia was his wife. And they were on the show 36 times. And they had to perform their skit featuring Hershey and Mary Elizabeth Doyle before Ed, so he made sure that it didn't offend anybody because he was in that similar situation. But Jerry also told me one thing about Ed. It's all about money. He could make money, he'd put Attila the Hun on, if he could make money. Ed Sullivan grappled with the challenges of network censorship, sponsorship threats, and his own personal beliefs and views. Elvis Presley was considered a bad influence on youngsters. Ed Sullivan said he would never invite Elvis to his variety show. But there was the soaring popularity, and there was big numbers for Elvis on the Steve Allen show. And Ed said, "Hey, those are dollar signs I see." Well, you know what? I'm going to have Elvis on the show. Yeah, we're going to have Elvis on the show. Elvis made 3 appearances on the show. Ed missed the first one. He was in a car accident. Charles Lawton was the MC that night. But he was back for the second one. And they showed Elvis from head to toe. And a little of this and, a little of that. But for the third and final performance, Elvis was filmed from the waist up. Elvis finished a 3-appearance deal and never appeared again on the show following his January 6, 1957 performance. Jim Morrison, lead singer of The Doors. Remember The Doors? Back in the day, well, he felt Sullivan's wrath. In 1963, CBS executives requested Bob Dylan either change the choice of song or lyrics. The song, Talking John Birch Paranoid Blues, Dylan replied, "If I can't play my song, I'd rather not appear on the show." Mick Jagger agreed to change the lyrics of the song that he wrote with Keith Richards, "Let's Spend the Night Together," remember that song? To "Let's Spend Some Time Together." Rolling Stones needed to be seen in America. Mick, as the cameras pull in on him, is rolling his eyes while singing the lyric, "Let's Spend Some Time Together." Jim Morrison, while singing the live song, or singing live the song, "Light My Fire," performed the song his way, regardless of the censorship request. The hit song with the lyrics, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," he shouts out, "Higher." The Sullivan people said that lyric should not be used, couldn't get much higher. It was unsuitable for primetime television. Changed the lyric. Jim Morrison does do the performance on the Sullivan Show, ignoring the request and screaming the lyrics higher, which he did in concert. That would be the Doors' last appearance on that show. Aretha Franklin, too much cleavage. Too much cleavage for Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin gave an account of being pulled from Sullivan's lineup for her low-cut dress because it showed too much cleavage. Aretha claimed that the show's execs asked her to change her dress because it was too revealing, to which she complied. However, her alternate dress was apparently not up to the show's standards. Aretha was scrapped from that Sunday night performance. Ingrid Bergman never appeared on the Sullivan Show, but he wanted to give Ingrid Bergman an opportunity to resurrect her career in the United States. She never appeared on the show. She was married to a doctor with whom she had a daughter, and then she embarked on an affair with an also married Italian director by the name of Roberto Rossellini. This affair would lead to a long period of censorship for years to come, and a bill being introduced in Congress to ban American films that featured actors guilty of immorality and lewdness and moral turpitude. Sullivan wanted her on the show. She said no, but because Sullivan wanted her, that changed attitudes toward her, and she was able to turn her image around. The Big Beat in Jim Crow and the South. Alan Freed, remember Alan Freed? Alan Freed. And he is hosting a show that is called The Big Beat, and it's on ABC in the afternoon in 1957. At least one show was. It is March 4th. The Big Beat with Alan Freed becomes the first nationally televised rock and roll dance show. The ABC TV show was a summer replacement and would continue in the 1957-58 season if it attracted an audience, which it did based on their research in the first 25 minutes of the show. TV show featured a live performance by Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Remember them? I Don't Want to Be a Juvenile Delinquent, and Goody Goody. Lyman was shown dancing with a white girl. That was it. That was it. The dance scene enraged ABC's Southern affiliates, and the network canceled the program. It's gone. Coincidentally, Dick Clark pitched to ABC a local show he was doing on Channel 6 in Philadelphia, WFIL, called Bandstand.
Yeah, I remember.
They took that show. Should have been Alan Freed. Dick Clark was only the host of that show because the original host, Bob Horn, was an alcoholic and a sexual predator. And they got rid of him and replaced him with Dick Clark. Smothers Brothers Show. How many of you watched the Smothers Brothers Show back in the day? It ends on April 4th, 1969, when the boss, Bill Paley, canceled the show. There were 73 shows, but only 72 were shown. The Comedy Hour was one of the few primetime shows featuring any political commentary. Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was the other one. And he looks like he just heard that his wife, Babes Paley, just went to bed with Nelson Rockefeller.
Oh, boy.
It wasn't exactly a secret. People knew about it. And Bill had his women as well. There is Bill Paley. In 1968-69, the premiere show, CBS deleted an entire segment of Harry Belafonte singing "Lord, Don't Stop the Carnival" against the backdrops of the Chicago 1968 Democratic Convention. And also they got rid of 2 lines of satire about their competitor, Bonanza. What was the problem? Hoss complained to Pa, Hup Sing didn't make my soup hot enough? Just get rid of them. Paley and CBS not only cut out Harry Belafonte's number completely, but to add insult to injury, replaced it with a 5-minute campaign ad from the Republican presidential nominee, me, Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon. Now, people are watching Smothers Brothers Show. Are they going to be voting for Dick Nixon?
No.
Probably not. Probably not. By the way, it's Dick. Why? Because one day I went up to him and I said, "Oh, good morning, Mr. President. No, Evan, please call me Dick. Call me Dick." And after that, it was always Dick Nixon to me. He's the one. There you go. CBS broadcast a rerun on March 9, 1969, replacing a show which Joan Baez talked about her husband David Harris, who was entering jail after refusing military service, while comedian Jackie Mason made a joke about children playing doctor. Snip, you're gone too. Gone. Goodbye. There's not much show left. Belafonte's gone. Baez is gone. Jackie Mason is snipped. Also the joke about Bonanza. What kind of show do you have left? Well, whatever was left, which was David Steinberg, made sure the show went into oblivion. David Steinberg grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, son of a rabbi in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So as a son of a rabbi, you have to imagine that he spent a lot of time in synagogue on the weekends listening to his father's sermons, right? Rabbi Steinberg. Anyway, so they come up with an idea, Tommy Smothers and David Steinberg and Mason Williams. What we're going to do is have David Steinberg sermonettes. Well, the battles continued, including over a David Steinberg sermon about Moses in the burning bush, and it probably didn't come from the Bible. It was the Steinberg skit that pushed CBS to cancel the show. Whoa! Oh, that's Julie, my daughter, and that's David, my son-in-law. I got to know Nixon, and I'll tell you the story real quick, because of Julie and David. 1985, Major League Baseball Umpires Association decides it's going to go on strike against the Major League Baseball owners. And the umpires were represented by a guy by the name of Richie Phillips, who recently passed away. And he's talking to the baseball commissioner, Peter Ueberroth. We're not going anywhere. How about an arbitrator? He says, who you got in mind? He says, Dick Nixon. Dick Nixon, get out of here. Where do you know him? He's next door babysitting. Can you imagine Dick Nixon babysitting your children? You put those toys away. Let me make something perfectly clear. If you don't put those toys away, I'm going to make sure that Henry Kissinger takes care of you. But that's how I got to meet Nixon through all of that. Nixon comes back into polite society because of that 1985 umpires dispute being the arbitrator. Nixon pushed for greater government control of broadcast media. At the same time, well-placed Nixon allies from the CBS program director-in-chief Robert D. Wood to TV Guide's publisher Walter Annenberg, who is some saint today in journalism because he sponsored or left money to sponsor a museum, adopted hardline stances against the Smothers Brothers. Over-the-air television and radio as news medium depend on getting government licenses to operate. Nixon would begin to revoke radio station or TV station licenses from owners he viewed as the enemy. Newspapers had no restrictions. Spiro Agnew, the very corrupt Vice President of the United States, who was still accepting kickbacks from Leonard Matz, a Maryland developer, while he was Vice President. And once in the White House, he got a check, or he got an envelope filled with money from Matz. Anyway, it's November 13, 1969, Des Moines, Iowa. Vice President Spiro Agnew accuses network TV news departments of bias and distortion. Perhaps the place to start looking for a credibility gap is not the offices of the government, but in the studios of the networks in New York. And here is Patrick Buchanan with Dick Nixon. Patrick Buchanan, who made a ton of money, cable TV news, a ton of money from television. That was his main source of income. He writes the anti-network news speech. And that is William Safire, somehow one of the crown princes of the New York Times editorial department, neighboring nabobs of negativism. Buchanan, Safire. The Nixon White House strategy was declaring war on the American news media. A former St. Louis Post-Dispatch writer, Patrick Buchanan, and William Safire stoked the flames. Safire was the one who wrote the neighboring nabobs of negativism words, or negativity words, for Spiro Agnew. And he went on writing columns for in the very business that he was trying to upset. Wrote a column for the New York Times newspaper. Daniel Shore. I once spoke at the Roseland Library. Over in New Jersey. And his niece was at the presentation I was giving. And she said, "Did you ever know my Uncle Daniel?" I said, "No, I've heard about him, but I've never dealt with him." And she said, "I was at a Passover Seder one day. My father was there, and Daniel was coming. And he told me, 'Keep your head up, he has sharp elbows.'" In other words, you know what? Everything you say will be held against you. But he was on Nixon's enemy list. The informal name of what started as a list of the President of the United States, Dick Nixon's major political opponents, compiled by Charles Colson, written by George T. Bell, assistant to Colson, special counsel to the White House, sent in memorandum form to the White House counsel John Dean on September 9, 1971. Not only was Shore on that list, but the actor Paul Newman was on that list. Why was he on Nixon's enemy list? Well, he marched with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. In 2008, released transcripts of Dick Nixon's Oval Office tapes had Nixon talking about the press is the enemy, establishment is the enemy, the professors are the enemy.
I remember in 1972, I remember the beginnings of the Watergate scandal. I'm
going to talk about that.
Oh, all right.
I'm going to talk about that.
Sorry.
Bear with me. That is Abby Hoffman.
Yeah.
And he is wearing that shirt, American flag shirt. And Merv Griffin has a show opposite Johnny Carson and Joey Bishop, and then Dick Cavett at 11:30 at night. Merv was very successful in syndication, and he is brought to CBS. CBS was uncomfortable with the guest Griffin wanted. Merv Griffin was a rock-ribbed Republican, but you would never know it from the interviews he did. He kept his politics out of it, which is probably why he was so successful. Anyway, his guests often spoke out against the Vietnam War. When the political activist Abby Hoffman was Merv's guest in April 1970, CBS blurred the video of Hoffman, so viewers at home would not see his trademark flag pattern shirt, American flag pattern shirt, even though other guests like Roy Rogers had worn the shirt in the past and were uncensored. Merv disliked the censorship imposed by CBS and complained, and he said, you know what, I don't need to say more, I'll go back to syndication, I'll take Arthur Treacher with me, I'll take Mrs. Miller with me, and we'll have a good old time, and I don't have to worry about that Bill Paley who was too worried about everything. CBS was no longer Tiffany the day that they handed me that temporary work card so I could work in the dairy on 57th Street doing my stuff. This is Dr. Frank Stanton. And Dr. Frank Stanton was the president of CBS. President of CBS was threatened with jail in 1971. CBS had broadcast an hour-long investigative report called The Selling of the Pentagon. About a $30 million campaign, $231 million in today's money, by the Defense Department to improve its image. The House Interstate and Foreign Commerce Committee demanded that Stanton turn over all material cut from the program. When he refused to comply, he was called before the committee. If newsmen are told their notes, films, and tapes will be subject to a compulsory process so the government can determine whether the news had been satisfactorily edited, the scope, nature, and vigor of their news reporting will be inevitably curtailed. Well, here's Watergate. And the real heroes of Watergate are Ben Bradley, who's the executive editor of the Washington Post, and Katharine Graham, who was the publisher of the Washington Post. They were the two that allowed these two guys, Woodward and Bernstein, to operate freely. Without their approval, Watergate might have just been a minor burglary. June 19, 1972, Washington Post reporters Carl Bernstein, he's the guy I could identify with because he was in the streets. He was a cop reporter, and I was always in the streets. I was not in the air-conditioned offices. I was in the streets, actually face-to-face with everybody. And Woodward, the well-educated guy who made sure every T was crossed, every I was dotted, the odd couple, perfect together for this assignment. And they revealed that one of the Watergate burglars, James McCourt, was a Republican Party security aide. And there's the Watergate Hotel, and you can tell it's a long time ago because I have hair. I have hair back in 1982. Now, to your point, 1972, Bill Paley ordered the shortening of a second installment of a two-part CBS evening news series on Watergate after he was contacted by Charles Colson, an aide to Dick Nixon. Paley ordered the banishment of instant analysis by his news people following presidential addresses. Paley's reporters took umbrage with what they believed was the censorship of their reporting in the Watergate piece, and they had traditionally enjoyed the ability to sway public opinion with their instant analysis following presidential addresses. Oh, Dick Nixon was at war, but he was never at war with me. I always got along with him, and I couldn't figure out why. After all, my last name is Jewish, and he was supposedly an anti-Semite. But he also had Klein and Stein and Kissinger around him, although he had Fred Malek go through the GOA, the Government of Accounting, and he told Fred Malek, any Jewish-sounding name, either fire them or never give them a raise, because the GOA did not approve of Nixon's budget at that time. Nixon compiled a list of enemies and then had them audited, like Dick Cavett claimed. His surrogates even mounted a campaign to yank the license of a television station owned by the Washington Post, which broke the Watergate scandal and published parts of the Pentagon Papers. That never happened. Lenny Bruce.
He was on that.
You know, the Manhattan DA, Frank Hogan, was thinking of me. He was really thinking of me back in April 1964. I lived on the Lower East Side, Eldridge Street. And the Cafe Go-Go was not a very far walk for me if I wanted to go as a 7, soon-to-be 8-year-old in Greenwich Village. And I could sneak out of the house. I'll never know. I'll sneak out of the house. and I'll go to Cafe A Go-Go, and I'll learn how to smoke, I'll learn how to drink, I'll learn how to curse, say dirty words and all that. So he was looking out for me. I know he was looking out for me, and that was my birthday present. The Manhattan attorney, District Attorney Frank Hogan, working in conjunction with local church officials, including New York Cardinal Francis Spellman, began their own investigation of Bruce. In 1964, when he was booked at the popular Greenwich Village nightclub Cafe A Go-Go in the spring, undercover detectives recorded 2 of his shows. They were not allowed to. It's copyright infringement. You're not allowed to record unless you have permission, a comedy routine. Anyway, they presented it to a grand jury, and they got an indictment. In early 1964, Bruce was arrested, charged with violating New York Penal Code 1140, barring obscene material that could aid, look, it's aimed right at me, corruption of morals of youth and others, and faced a maximum punishment of 3 years in prison. The club's owner, Howard Solomon, was also arrested for allowing Bruce to perform the material. In November 1964, Bruce fired his attorneys. He was convicted, so was Solomon. Bruce was sentenced to 4 months in the workhouse. Solomon's sentence was later overturned. Bruce became a free speech martyr and would influence the comics of that era, including Joan Rivers, George Carlin, and Richard Pryor, especially George Carlin. George Carlin and his 7 dirty words. Court banned 7 dirty words. It is May 27, 1972, and the comedian George Carlin took the stage at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in Southern California. Recording material for a new album, Classic Clown, he debuted a monologue called 7 Words You Cannot Say on Television. And everybody was laughing, and here are all the words, but I don't want to offend anybody, so if you could probably figure out the words if you read it, but I'm not offending anybody, so I'll just leave it at that. Carlin toured with Lenny Bruce a decade earlier, when Bruce was arrested in Chicago for saying at least 2 of those words during a show. George Carlin was arrested in Milwaukee, July 21st, 1972, for violating obscenity laws after performing his 7 words that you can never say on television routine at Summerfest. And there is George Carlin. He is arrested. He's charged with profanity and disturbing the peace. But the case was eventually dismissed because the language, while indecent, and who says it's indecent? Might not be indecent to me. Who says it's indecent? Was not considered obscene enough to violate obscenity laws. Around 2 p.m. on October 30th, 1973, New York City radio station WBAI-FM warned that it was about to air a recording with potentially offensive language and proceeded to play an offshoot of Carlin's routines, this one called Filthy Words. The CBS executive John Douglas, a member of the watch group called Morality and Media, who's morality? Who's morality? You say you got morality, that means I don't? Or you might not, or you might agree? Morality and Media. Anyway, listen to the broadcast alongside his 15-year-old son as they drove home. Howard Stern once said, if you don't like me, turn the dial. Find something else. Find something else. Well, Douglas didn't find something else. George Carlin's 7 Dirty Words at evening with George Carlin, WBAI 99.5 FM, presents Carlin at the Beacon Theater on November 10th. Douglas filed a complaint with the Federal Communications Commission a few weeks later over the language aired in the middle of the day. In February 1975, the FCC issued a declaratory order that determined the broadcast was indecent and threatened to impose sanctions on the Pacifica Foundation, who owned WBAI. 1977, the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled in favor of the broadcast entity by a 2-to-1 margin, sending it up to the Supreme Court. On July 3rd, 1978, the Supreme Court issued its landmark ruling in the Federal Communications vs. Pacifica Foundation, upholding the FCC's power to determine language guideline limitations by a 5-4 margin. Oh, Archie! Yes, Dingbat. Where's Meathead? Little girl. All in the Family. How many of you watched All in the Family back then? All in the Family. The Family Viewing Hour, and it would impact this show. The Family Viewing Hour was a policy established by the Federal Communications Commission in the United States. Under the policy, each television network in the U.S. had a responsibility to air family-friendly programming during the first hour primetime lineup, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 to 8 Central Time. The border towns, it's a little more tricky with Canada because Canada didn't have the same thing, and some of their stations probably could air what morality didn't want. NBC, program brought to you in living color on NBC. 1974, one television scene caused a strong backlash. The NBC television movie Born Innocent featured a lesbian rape scene. The scene drew much outcry upon its first airing and was blamed for the real-life rape of a young girl, which led to a case before the California Supreme Court. In January, the FCC chairman, Richard E. Wiley, addressed the Senate and House Communications and Commerce Subcommittee, stating that all three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, agreed to adopt a family viewing hour in response to criticism. The National Association of Broadcasters took the gesture one step further, decreeing that local stations had to air or would air family-friendly programming in the 7 p.m., 6 p.m. Central Time slot, a time that networks were forbidden from programming under the primetime access rule, and thus up to individual stations to program, which is why you got a lot of The Muppet Show, you got a lot of Wheel of Fortune, eventually Jeopardy, the nighttime Price is Right, the nighttime Gong Show, all of these shows to fill time in. Norman Lear objects, the guy who was the brains behind All in the Family. All in the Family, which was the runaway top-rated show in the U.S. since 1971, was moved to 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central on Mondays after 5 seasons, leading the CBS Saturday Night Network. That was a death sentence. And the reason why it was a death sentence, because at 9 o'clock Eastern on Monday nights, there was something called Monday Night Football with my old friend Howard Cosell. Anyway, that was going to kill the show. With the support of varying guilds, including the Writers Guild of America, he won the case. We the people, unconstitutional. On November 4th, 1976, the United States District Court Judge Warren J. Ferguson declared the family viewing hour unconstitutional. This is Lowell Bergman, and Lowell Bergman was with CBS, 60 Minutes. 60 Minutes has this great reputation. Whether it's deserved or not, I'm not sure. But anyway, I'm going to talk about Lowell. My wife knew his mother, Alice Perlmutter, who was a contractor until she was 97 years old and also was still driving at the age of 97. Anyway, in the 1980s, Lowell Bergman became a producer for CBS's 60 Minutes. But it was the story about Big Tobacco, later adopted for film, that made Bergman a star in his own right. In 1993, Bergman received a box on his doorstep in Berkeley, California, sent anonymously. It contained internal documents from the tobacco company, Philip Morris. For help analyzing the material, Bergman contacted Jeffrey Wigand, a former head of research for the tobacco company Brown & Williamson. B&W fired Wigand and had him sign strict confidentiality agreements. While that meant Wigand could not talk to Bergman about his issues with B&W, 60 Minutes used him as a paid consultant for an investigative story about fire-safe cigarettes. Wigand eventually agreed to an exclusive interview with Bergman in 1995, and there is Wigand. B&W fired Wigand and had him sign strict confidentiality agreements. And he is all of a sudden on 60 Minutes, or supposed to be. CBS's lawyers were hesitant about airing the story. A year before, 7 tobacco CEOs had testified before Congress about the possible side effects of their company's products. All 7 said under oath that they believed nicotine was not addictive. Months later, the Justice Department opened a criminal investigation of the CEOs, charging them that they committed perjury. Oh, by the way, one of the CEOs, his name Andrew Tisch, and his father owned CBS. Gee, what a coincidence. What a coincidence. CBS and Westinghouse Electronic Corporation were in merger talks. If the $5.4 billion deal, more than $10.3 billion today, went through, top executives at CBS were going to make millions. The news outlet did not want to air the tobacco report for personal reasons. Bergman said, worried that a lawsuit by a tobacco company could jeopardize the merger. At one point, Bergman said, a CBS executive told him the corporation will not risk its assets on this story, period. By late 1995, CBS decided to air a sanitized version of the story, but without Wygant's interview. Gee, I wonder how this happened. Soon the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal had all the information. Could it be that Lowell Bergman had friends in high places who relished the story? The answer is yes. Bergman gave it to them, and they printed it. The damage was done. CBS's credibility was in question. Bergman quit. The Wygant interview would be seen in 1996 after CBS was outed. The movie. Bergman's investigation of the tobacco industry, the subsequent breakup with 60 Minutes were the basis for the 1999 film, The Insider, starring Al Pacino as Bergman and Russell Crowe as Wygant. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards. Meanwhile, here's a quick story about Mike Wallace from Charlie Osgood. At my press club, we were giving Charlie Osgood a retirement party. We didn't know when he was going to retire because he didn't have his knee replacement scheduled yet. But we decided, let's give him the party anyway. So we give him the party. And he's telling us about the first time he was on CBS Evening News. And he said it was Saturday night, it was pretty much buried, but he got a call from Mike Wallace. See me in my office on Monday morning. Well, he goes there Monday morning, and the first thing Wallace says to Osgood after watching the show, you look like the substitute teacher. You think Walter Cronkite knows everything? No, he doesn't know everything. Act like you know everything, and you're not the substitute teacher. A little insight on TV. Bergman said his relationship with Wallace and Don Hewitt never recovered. The two bosses had sided with CBS over the Wygant interview. At a journalism conference in 2000, Hewitt denounced Bergman, saying that he should not be allowed within 100 miles of the newsroom. A year later, he called Bergman supposedly to catch up. Bergman said he was busy and hung up, and they never spoke again. Bergman resurfaced on PBS's Frontline show. And we are going to leave with the Super Bowl of 2004 and Private Ryan. You may have saw the Private Ryan movie. Okay. So this is where we're going to leave it, as they say in TV. Janet Jackson's costume malfunction at halftime of the February 1st, 2004 game caused a ruckus and changed how TV and radio present programming. ABC's showing of Saving Private Ryan was impacted. The FCC acts. Justin Timberlake grabbed Janet Jackson in a dance routine, accidentally forcing her dress to open, which revealed one of her breasts. Except you never saw it. Because the human eye does not show you anything that lasts 9/16 of a second. You never saw it live. You never did. Your eye is not fast enough. But that 9/16 of an impression, or second, left an impression. Jackson performed a medley of hits, beginning with All For You, Rhythm Nation, and a brief excerpt of The Knowledge. Surprise guest Timberlake appeared on stage to perform a duet of his song, Rock Your Body with Jackson. As Timberlake reached the final line of Rock Your Body, Bet I'll Have You Naked, by the end of the song, he pulled a part of Jackson's costume. The move revealed Jackson's right breast adorned by a sun-shaped nipple shield for less than a second. Can't see it that fast. The CBS broadcast immediately cut to a wide shot of the stage for a pyrotechnic effect, and then an aerial view of the Houston Stadium. The internet started buzzing. Social media. Hey, did you see that? See what? Did you see that? No, I didn't. Do you have TiVo? Yeah, I do. Oh, go back to the Super Bowl show. Go back. And then start slowing it down, and slowing it down, and slowing it down, frame by frame. That's it, I got it. One frame, one frame. It was the buzz on the internet, the buzz on the internet. Republican politicians immediately pounced on the internet. Politicians derided Viacom, CBS, and the Viacom MTV unit, the Viacom MTV unit, which produced the halftime show. Within 15 hours, lawmakers gathered on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, pointing a finger at Jackson and CBS for promoting something immoral. Oddly enough, they forgot Timberlake's role in the incident. The hammer then came down on CBS. The Republican Federal Communications Commission majority got involved and fined Viacom CBS $550,000 and changed indecency rules. Viacom CBS fought the fines for several years and won. Meanwhile, Saving Private Ryan. How does this impact Saving Private Ryan? The FCC raised the amount stations and networks could be docked for what they termed as questionable images and dirty words. In 2004, television stations were scared off by the prospects of fines. 66 ABC TV affiliates, mostly in the South, did not show the movie Saving Private Ryan on Easter Sunday because of foul language concerns. The TV stations did not want to risk a fine. Saving Private Ryan had won 5 Academy Awards following the film's 1998 release. It previously aired on ABC in 2001 and 2002. Military veteran groups were furious with the stations. Disney, ABC offered to pay the fines of the 66 stations if the FCC decided to dock them. The FCC ignored a foul language complaint about the movie in 2002. 1 complaint. 2 airings, 1 complaint. Timberlake's career was not impacted by the incident. Jackson's career floundered. In 2014, the FCC chairman, Michael Powell, long after his term ended, said the incident was overblown. Changes in radio and TV now. Watch the Academy Awards. Watch other award shows like the Grammys. Watch live sports. They're all on tape delay. They're all on 10-second delay in the event that somebody says one of those 7 words or somebody pulls off a costume. Because stations, over-the-air TV stations, non-satellite radio stations, which are licensed by the federal government, do not want to risk a fine. The Super Bowl incident changed how television was perceived, or radio was perceived, by morality groups. Any questions? Any comments? Your turn to talk.